All right. So yeah, let's dive right in. A little prelude, like what I was thinking about before we get into the carbon dioxide and the relationship with stress tolerance is like thinking about how fish breathe. And so when fish breathe, like the water has to go through their gills, right? And it just kind of like passes through. Like I think that's the mechanism for most fish. And so some fish will do that by moving right through the water and then it just kind of goes through. But I've also seen that like some sharks will sit in like a vent where they'll just kind of position themselves and then the water just like continually moves and they'll kind of breathe that way. And so, what obviously is different for us is like the same pathway to go in is the same pathway that we use to go out. And so we just have this like constant flow of air in and out of our lungs. Now, um, I guess what's kind of like what I found interesting about that, um, yeah, is just that like this mechanism that we have to use has to be active in some regard, right? So we're constantly doing that. And then if we think about oxygen and CO2 and what we learned in maybe middle school level, high school level, was that it's oxygen in, CO2 out. And it's like, well, why would our bodies do that? And oh, I remembered. It was like we have this saying of like, water to a fish, like trying to explain like what water is. They're like, what's water? It's like it's all around us. And we actually forget that like we're humans in this like pocket of air that surrounds our, these layers of atmosphere, stratosphere, so forth. And so we're just kind of like we're fish in water and we're just like trying to bring in this fluid that has some like resistance to it, right? Um, if we think about aerodynamics, it's like there's a lot of resistance that vehicles and airplanes have to overcome to get around this air that's actually has some like resistance to it. So anyway, I thought that was kind of cool. But one of the main ideas when it comes to CO2 and oxygen is our pH balance, right? So our body is at the most like fundamental level is chemistry. So CO2 is it's a little acidic and then O2 is more alkaline. And so it's always trying to like balance these levels to create this buffer, to create this ideal level of pH. So pH, by the way, is it just relates to how easily we can attach hydrogen atoms or how easily they kind of come off. So it's really kind of zoomed in on like the most fundamental level of how all of our systems operate. And so of course we want to balance that. Now, one of the ways that the body regulates this is with chemoreceptors. So we have these receptors that are especially dense, like in our carotids, and then in our amygdala. And so basically it's just sensing how much CO2 is building up in the body. Yeah. And so CO2 is actually the primary stimulus for breathing, right? We don't have a receptor in the body for oxygen. Um, so if you've been to the doctor's office and you put like those like things on your finger and tells you how much oxygen is flowing in your body, you could you could hold your breath as long as you want, and that number will probably not go down. It's usually around like 98, 99%. And I tried it. I've held my breath as long as I could, and that number just doesn't change. But we definitely feel like it should or it does, but it's just the CO2 that's rising in our body, and that's what in part becomes uncomfortable. Um, so really like a little bit more on CO2 is is how CO2 like interacts with oxygen. And it's kind of like in this indirect way. So ideally we want to get oxygen from the outside. into our lungs, into the bloodstream, and then into the tissue, right? So when we think about red blood cells, they're kind of like little taxis that bring the oxygen around from the lungs into the tissues. So when the red blood cell goes to, like, I think about the lungs as like the airport, so the taxi comes and picks them up. Four oxygen hop in, assuming that it was fully, deoxygenated. There was no oxygen there, so four hop in, and then the taxi drives, and then it goes to the tissue where the oxygen will hop out. So ideally, that's what we're looking for in this process. So that's what we're seeing on our finger is really the blood oxygenation. It's like how much oxygen is in the taxis, right? So red blood cells have this component called hemoglobin, and hemoglobin really kind of makes it like sticky. Like there's this affinity, is what we call it, for oxygen. And so once it wants to bind to hemoglobin, right? It wants to sit in the car seat, and then it's kind of like the oxygen doesn't really want to get out of the car. It still like wants to bind to that site on the red blood cell. And so what happens is we can think about CO2 as the individual that opens the car door to then let and assist the oxygen out, right? And so if there's no carbon dioxide present, the oxygen is just going to stay in the taxi, right? And then we see on our pulse ox that, hey, we have plenty of oxygen, but it's not being delivered to the tissue, right? It's not actually going to where it needs to go, right? So why is that an issue? It's like, well, we can produce energy without oxygen, it turns out, right? We would call that our anaerobic process. It just means without oxygen. And when we use that system, we can produce 2 units of ATP per this transaction. So it's 2 units of ATP, but you get all of this like byproduct, right? That's the lactic acid that we use. But when we have oxygen present, when we use the aerobic process, right? It's glucose plus oxygen, right? Those are kind of two main components. And then we get 32 units of ATP. So a much higher yield. And then the byproduct of that is just carbon dioxide and a little bit of water, right? So it's 16 times more efficient, and the byproduct is an entirely different experience, right? So we often think about like lactic acid and pyruvate, these byproducts in the anaerobic process as like the things that make us feel a little sluggish, like our legs start to feel heavy when we're working out and things of that nature. Whereas when we think about what's happening in the aerobic process, much more energy produced. And this isn't just energy, by the way, of like, oh, energy to run up the stairs or energy to like do shoulder presses. This is energy at the cellular level. It's the energy that our cells use to build new cell walls. It's energy it uses to get rid of waste product like proteins that have been broken down, right? It's like all of these like processes that happen inside the cell. Um, so higher energy yield, plus we get this exhaust product, the CO2, right? It's kind of just like it's the exhaust. But CO2, one, is opening the car door for oxygen to actually be delivered. Carbon dioxide is also a vasodilator. So when CO2 is present, we're increasing the diameter of the blood vessels. And that then allows more oxygen and more red blood cells to be delivered to the area, right? So we can also think about carbon dioxide as this like signaling molecule, right? More blood gets delivered, and it's kind of like, all right, let's bring in more red blood cells to this area. The CO2 is already there, so it's opening the car door and then letting the oxygen now move into the tissues, right? So this happens, really everywhere all at the same time, but especially when we work out, right? So if I'm doing bicep curls, I'm creating more CO2 in my bicep, right? So that does those two things. It vasodilates, right? And then it just allows energy, oxygen to be delivered into that muscle to then use that aerobic system. And it just becomes this like really beautiful cycle. So kind of cool. Um, so when we think then about like, now we can kind of get into like a little bit of like the stress idea, right? So CO2 is this like really nice proxy for stress tolerance, for stress resilience. Like um, we talked about this a little bit, where CO2 is like kind of constantly rising in our body, right? It's like all of these processes, assuming they're aerobic, like CO2 is going to rise. And what's really important about this is just like our relationship with that sensation of CO2 rising, because we might interpret it as I'm running out of oxygen, right? Like I feel like I'm suffocating, like I can't breathe when that really builds up. So there was this like really cool experiment, which is like I don't recommend anybody ever do this, but what they did was they gave participants um, air that had a higher, like a much higher level of carbon dioxide. And they literally just they put the mask on, deep breath in, and over 75% of the people that did that had a panic attack. They're like, I feel like I'm suffocating, right? So this carbon dioxide was this huge signal for like it's danger, right? And so, but it didn't happen for everybody either. So that's an extreme example of like how carbon dioxide just kind of registers with us. And so, the panic attack example is like it's anxiety producing and they just didn't know how to handle that. But at the same time, like if we had the pulse ox on their finger, which they did, it's like they had plenty of oxygen. You're fine. Kind of crazy, right? So what we really want to do then is make sure that we're just tolerating a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the body, right? A lot of people, when we look at the downstream effects of dysfunctional breathing, they're offloading the thing that is necessary to open the car door and let oxygen into the tissues, right? If they're breathing with their mouth open, if they're um, just breathing too fast, right? And all these things that kind of like tend to go together, they'll go hand in hand. Um, and really, all of the dysfunctional like diagnoses, dysfunctional breathing diagnoses that we see, really all have this downstream effect of poor carbon dioxide tolerance, right? And we can test that really easily. It's just like how long can you hold your breath, right? Either on the inhale, on the exhale. The kind of entry level one that we do with a lot of people, really like all of my clients, is the Bolt test. And so that one is like we just kind of give you like a little, you get 3 breaths to kind of prep, and then you just hold your breath once you get down to the bottom, right? And so what I've found, working with people who have chronic fatigue, who have like a lot of these like poor sleep, adrenal fatigue is another big one, is that they'll hold their breath and they're like, all right, 5 seconds, and they're like, I need to breathe again, right? And so most likely like they've kind of been breathing in a way, if their tolerance is that poor, they're going to offload the CO2 very, very fast. And then they start to shift the energy system that they're using. And it's like no wonder you're producing less energy, you're creating more lactic acid, pyruvate, and that's just like building up over time. So it's a huge remember it's a 16 time increase when we use our aerobic system. Okay. So the solution then in part becomes like just like graded exposure. It's like, what does that sensation mean? And so, graded exposure could look like, someone is scared of spiders, right? It's like, well, maybe first we just show them like a printed out photo of a spider. And they're like, at first they're like, oh, spider. And then they get used to that, of course. And then maybe the next thing we do is show them a video, right? And they're still doing this, and right, their breathing changes and holding their breath. And then maybe the next step is here's one in a terrarium. They'll do the same thing. And then next thing, then it's tarantula in their hand, right? And so we just do the same thing. And what we do is we parse out the sensation of like what that feels like, right? And when we do that test, a lot of people have this experience of, all right, I'm holding my breath and there's this inner dialogue happening. It's like, do I need to breathe right now, or can I hold it a little bit? Do I breathe on that first wave of discomfort, or can I hold it and then, oh, now that second one? And then eventually, okay, now I definitely have to breathe. And then even after the fact, they're like, did I have to breathe right now? So there's this like subjective experience. And what's really nice about the Bolt test for that reason is that there is this psychology and physiology kind of component like all packed in together, which is really nice. So there are other tests that we'll use for that. But yeah, we can imagine how that CO2 rising sends the alarm system. Again, it's like it's carotid, right? So that's our blood flowing to the brain. That's kind of important. And then in our amygdala system, right, that's our kind of detection, like danger detection system. And it's just paying attention to the CO2 that's rising. It's doing a bunch of other things, but those are the baroreceptors, those chemoreceptors in those areas. And so when they get those signals, if it's highly sensitized, right, it's going to then tell our breathing, our automatic breathing apparatus, which is in the brainstem. So evolutionarily, like that's like old hardware. And it's just like breathe this way, offload the CO2, offload the CO2. And then that's probably happening 20,000 times to 25,000 times per day, right? If we're breathing at that rate, and especially through our mouth, like we're offloading the CO2, the thing that is necessary for energy production, for vasodilation, right? So then we're thinking about blood pressure as well, and heart rate. Yeah. So I'll pause there. I'll pause there. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot those.
Um, shoot, what was it? So with okay, it's not really a clear question, but it is a question. Um,
Go for it.
so I guess okay, well, breath holds.
Yep.
Um, and then you get the wave. That's kind of I gotta breathe, right? And then we get another wave, and then the third wave, kind of like you said. Um, here's my question: If I'm pushing past the really kind of where it starts to get painful, and my thoughts will kind of start to race a little bit. Sometimes I'm like, no, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. But if I'm pushing into that zone, am I gonna make um the breath holds longer, maybe like after a while? And I'm guessing that will increase my tolerance for overall stress. Is that right? Because then I can like handle CO2 longer. And if I'm, you know, start breathing too fast in the daytime for whatever reason, I get, caught up in my head, and then all of a sudden I catch myself and I'm like, whoa, what am I doing? I'm just driving, you know?
Yeah.
Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, um, I guess, am I gonna kind of with practice, I know you got it's probably better to do like the in and out, the slow one. But if I can get to the longer, push past those when it starts to kind of get really uncomfortable, I might the panic, you know? Can I go, well, is it going to be like my body's going to adjust, like I'll grow new neurons or whatever to handle, you know, 2 minute ones easier compared to 2 minutes will feel like 1 minute and 30 seconds. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah.
Is it, does it work like that? Or is it just kind of, it depends how I've been breathing all day kind of thing?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Let me say this and then let me know if this answers it. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I were to if I were to ask someone, I'm like, how good is your squat? Right? How good is your
Yeah.
squat? Right? It's a functional movement. We've been doing it since we were toddlers. Maybe we
Hmm.
stopped doing it.
Yeah.
Right? We could be talking about two very different things. So someone could be like, all right, what's my heaviest back squat? That's what they're
Yeah.
thinking about. And then someone else is like, well, I garden and I squat down 1,000 times while I garden throughout the day. Right? I'm
Yeah.
very mobile. It's easy for me, and I kind of just like keep going up and down. I can stay there for as long as I want. Right?
Yeah.
So the breath is kind of like that too, then. Right? It's like, what is my peak experience? How long can I hold it?
Hmm.
But then how we breathe throughout the day, if we're offloading CO2 like we've been talking about, is going to play a very big role in what that experience looks like as well,
Hmm.
right? And notice how like they help each other. So if I do get very good at squatting with high intensity, it's like, well, I still need to do all the groundwork to have the requisite mobility, but then of course strength as well. Whereas someone who's just, again, like think maybe even like toddlers, right? Like their squats are very good, but can they back squat a lot? It's like we haven't tested it, right? But they can stay there for as long as they want to. Their mobility is very good, and so it's actually very easy and comfortable for them. So ideally, we want both in the squat, right? It's like, yeah, I want to have a lot of strength, be able to move some weight against, the barbell or whatever I'm lifting, but I also want to just like be able to like hang out by the campfire. It's like I should be able to squat like our ancestors probably did, right?
Hmm.
So each one is going to help the other. Each one is going to help the other, and ideally we want to have both, right? So even when you go into this like Wim Hof cyclical hyperventilation and you do the breath hold, it's going to give you some information about how you've been breathing the past 24 hours. Right? In the same way that the Bolt test gives us some information as to how we've been breathing the past 24 hours or, whatever that window might be, right? So it's just that like, you kind of let it build up a little bit, and if you are kind of interested as like, well, why was yesterday's breath hold better and I still did the same number of breaths? It's like, well, yes, how I was breathing throughout the day, but that also includes like what were the stressors that were changing my physiology, changing my breathing, right? Because the breath is just going to reflect like how our physiology is responding to our environment, right? And so, yeah, this is good. If you're catching yourself, you're in your car and you're like, why am I breathing rapidly or why am I like breathing this way? It doesn't really make sense for me just sitting and like there's
Yeah.
nothing that's really that exertional. But here's the psychology and the physiology part of that, of course, is like, well, the physiology is just like I'm sitting, my hands are in front of me, my foot's going like this. Shouldn't really require that much. But the psychology of it is like, well, I have to be very alert, and this thing in our head requires a lot of oxygen, right? And so when we increase the demand of brain activity, it's like that is a serious metabolic demand, right? So it's roughly 8%, something like that, body weight, but it takes at least 20% of our energy, right? So it's a huge demand, right? When we start to ask our brain to do all these processes, right? And so that alone can start to increase the way that we breathe, right? And then of course there's just like the habit. It's just like, right? It's something that became automated. So I often think about walking, right? It's like we started walking when we were around 1 year old, and then now we have a limp, And even though my
Yeah.
knee is healed, it's like I could still walk with a limp forever, right? So we kind of we just like we take inventory, we just observe how we're walking. Maybe we do some corrective exercises, what have you, but we can smooth that out. And so the same thing goes with breathing, right? And so yeah, the first step is to catch it, which is really good. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Was there a safety
Um,
question in there? Kind of tied in with the
Safety?
breath holds? Yeah.
I don't know about safety. I mean, I don't know if this entirely ties in, but before I started doing all this with you, like I remember like might have been a year ago. Remember you sent me like a text or whatever on like a Wim Hof thing, and I did it, and I held my breath for like 2 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever, with
Hmm.
no training at all. You're like, what the heck? And I've been doing this, and I can barely get past 2 minutes, and I'm like, what the hell happened? Like I wasn't even doing anything back then. It was literally after work. I was just laying in bed. I was like, all right. I turned on a techno song, and I just was like, holy crap. And now I'm like doing it every day for what, 6, 7 months now, since what, July? May? I don't even know. How long has it been? A while.
Yeah.
Maybe 8 months. I don't know. And now it's like I that kind of can't wrap my head around. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's kind of weird. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just need to push
Yeah. I mean, if you're, so my
or
recommendation,
relax. Maybe I just need to relax.
yeah, so that's definitely the key. Like it's this paradox of like the more you relax when you do your breath holds, the easier it becomes, right? And we
Yeah.
we mean that like literally for the body, right? So even right now, like we can probably often detect like where we're holding tension where we don't
Hmm.
necessarily need to just for sitting,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh yeah, I can kind of like why am I holding tension in my face? Like let's let that relax. If I just scan my body, it's like, oh yeah, there's kind of these areas that could just sink in just a little bit more. And so the
Yeah.
body's relaxation is going to be a reflection of the mind's relaxation and vice versa, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm kind of assuming like if I just go like this and squeeze things, it's like it's going to be much more likely that my mind also has that tension built into it. So I can kind of create it if I wanted to, right? Like, let's make my
Yeah.
mind more
Yeah.
tense. How would I do that? It's like, well, I would tense my body and then my mind would kind of
Yeah.
follow suit. But yeah, so the
Yeah.
relaxation of the body, and then yes, kind of it's like what does relaxation in the mind look like? Well, we talk to ourselves. The self-talk
Hmm.
becomes very relaxing and calming. It becomes slower too, right? So just like the rate at which we speak to ourselves, literally just slower talking will also help that. Um, and so, time kind of gets distorted, as we know, for um, all different reasons. So there's like perceived time and chronos time, right? The Greeks had chronos and kairos, right? And so those were kind of different experiences or like different ways of thinking about time. We also know that like Einstein's way of thinking about time is very different. So if we put two clocks in airplanes and they're heading different directions or rockets that are flying close to the speed of light and things of that nature. Anyway, like time is a super interesting topic, but like it
Hmm.
changes when we're holding our breath.
Yeah. It
All to
does.
say. And so if we kind of slow down time, so to speak, and become like really in tune, really present, like it's gonna create this time dilation. Yeah. That's at least how I like to think about it when I'm doing the breath holds. And that's what I've heard like some of the Guinness World Record holder say,
Yeah.
free divers. Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's that end, right? And that's like doing sets of back squats.
Hmm.
Right. But it's just as important how we move and how we breathe throughout the rest of the day.
Maybe that's what it was too. Maybe I just wasn't breathing on like a whole lot, the whole fast that most of that day or something. Maybe I was just super relaxed most of the day. So it was just like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it very much could have been. So there's it's really like I like to think about the breathing like breath work as five different practices. And the third one is we call it um, hypercapnic, right? So we're just like we're allowing a lot of CO2. So this comes from Buteyko was really like one of the first ones. That's the guy's last name. And then more recently is oxygen advantage.
Hmm.
And basically the premise is like, can we start to like under breathe, basically? Like, can we
Hmm.
allow like a high level of CO2 to stay there for extended periods of time and pair it with movement? Yeah. So, in kind of this like early exercise stuff, we see things like walking and holding our breath,
Hmm.
right? But it doesn't have to be a breath hold, right? It's just kind of that's like an entryway to kind of start to get that experience. What it could be is just breathing really slow while we walk,
I see.
right? Like really slow. So we're kind of just like keeping a really high level of carbon dioxide and getting more comfortable with that. So maybe it's not super high at first, right? But like eventually, like we're tolerating, like we're almost sitting on that first wave, like right before that first wave comes of that CO2 air hunger. It's like you're actually kind of like just oscillating right before and with that first wave.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Um, a really kind of a, like a more practical approach for that would just be like walking and counting your steps. So like on the inhale would be 4 steps and exhale would be four
Hmm.
steps, something like that, right? And just if you want to standardize it, we would just try to walk at the same pace, maybe same terrain even.
Hmm.
And then from there you would build up the number of steps per inhale and per exhale, right? And
Amazing.
start to feel like
Yeah.
what's actually sustainable, right? That's kind of the premise. That's part of it as I can understand, right? It's just like, yeah, I could do 3 rounds of 10 steps and 10 steps on my inhale and exhale respectively, but then I'm done and then I have to catch my breath, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of looking for like, hey, what is actually my kind of necessary minimum or maximum, however you want to think about it. So we actually do the same thing if you want to look at like the non-moving version would be like lying down and doing like super long inhales and super long exhales, right? Maybe it takes me 15 seconds to inhale and 15 seconds to exhale. Or maybe I do a box breathing version, which is like I'll do a 6 second exhale, but then I'll hold it at the top for 10, 6 second exhale, hold it at the bottom for 10, and then just like keep going and see if that's a sustainable rate. And then we just play with those numbers.
Yeah.
One
I
more,
don't do a
one,
lot of box breathing. I probably should do a
yeah.
little more of that.
So, one quick note there, if we do box breathing, like that's kind of more just like classic CO2 training,
Hmm.
right? Um, Also nervous system training, since we're holding at the top and bottom. But if we're trying to correct the way that we're breathing throughout the day, then it's not box breathing. Then it's just in and out.
Like in five out five, right? Basically.
Yeah, well, you could do 10 and 10. You could do 15 and 15,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, if we're trying to correct what we're doing throughout the day, usually we'll keep it pretty even, right? The inhale and the exhale is the same duration.
So if I go back to the whole taxi thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems kind of weird. It's like, well, if I breathe faster, wouldn't I be getting more oxygen in? But then it's like, no, because then you're not giving it time, like the taxi time to get the blood vessels big enough to offload, right? But if I breathe slower, then it gives them time for the blood vessels to expand, like for the ports to open, basically. And then everything can flow, So it's like how I'm trying to kind of explain it. It's like
Yeah.
it's like a valve, right? If I'm like water shoots out faster if you've got the valve less open, but it won't be as much flow. It comes out like a jet, like the jet nozzle on a hose.
Yeah.
But if you open the flow, you're gonna get, more in, more out. It just won't flow as powerfully as fast. So
Yeah.
it's just like slow it down, and then you're just gonna build more, more.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense. I get it. I get what you're saying. Like I can see it. It just
Yeah.
took me like
I
a
know.
while for it to like click into my head.
Mhm.
Um, I see it though.
Yeah, so it's kind of like
Mm,
the the oxygen hops into the taxi, and if we're over breathing, like it just goes for a ride. It never leaves the taxi. It just kind of keeps
yeah,
staying red blood cell. Never
because
gets
they
out of the
can't.
car, doesn't go to the tissue. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like
Yeah.
not enough space to get in,
Mhm.
basically.
Yeah. So what this really amounts to, right? It's like, yeah, we want to make sure the CO2 is there to open the car door, right? We can't just like offload that, then we just get rid of all the people that are going to open the car door.
And honestly, when I'm lifting weights now, I mostly do nasal breathing. I barely go in and out of in the nose, out the mouth. Like I barely do that because I feel like I lose energy.
Mm.
So like if I'm doing pull-ups, I'm in and out of the nose. Push-ups, in and out of the nose. Basically everything is in and out of the nose unless it starts to get really hard and it's like my last few reps and it's starting to feel heavy and then I'll go in the nose, then out the mouth and I'll just get that hard push.
Yeah.
Deadlifts, I still kind of go in the nose, out the mouth. That's just because, but I'm not doing a whole lot. It's a small number.
Yeah.
But that's what I've noticed. If I'm going to be doing like high amount of reps and I'm going to be going, 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 I'm just
Hmm.
going in and out of the nose because I feel my power levels like drop
Yeah.
if I'm going in the nose, out the mouth. So I'm
Yeah.
doing the weightlifting kind of, it's more like cardio the way I'm doing it.
Hmm. Totally. Yeah. So, if you think about like distance running, like any steady state
Hmm.
exercise, it would make sense to just pick one breathing gear, just like through the
Hmm.
nose and then stay there forever. Right. So that would make a lot of sense. But for something that's so variable, like I'm doing intensity and then I kind of rest for a moment before I pick up the next weight or do a different movement, we kind of expect that our breathing system would change and the way that we would breathe would adapt really quickly. So that's part of one of the things that we're trying to train, right? And what's really cool about the in through the nose, out through the mouth, the cycle breathing, is that it's really easy to change just our mouth
Hmm.
aperture
Hmm.
to to fit the context, right? Because if I breathe out through a straw, right, it's very easy for me to do that. I could even let that just be passive, and then rib cage comes down, and it's all very nice. But I could also just mouth open, and that'd be an entirely different experience.
Yeah.
Still able to breathe really fast. That would still be like ramping up, right? But then we still get all the benefits of breathing in through the nose. So, yeah.
Here's another one I've been uh trying to understand. Okay, if I'm doing, let's say I'm doing big breath work, right? What I've noticed is if I go versus if I sigh like for 30 breaths and then I inhale through my nose and squeeze, I get this weird like high floaty feeling. I don't know, actually like this kind of weird, like this, it just feels like I'm kind of floating in water.
Hmm.
But if I'm just doing like that without the sigh, I basically never get that feeling.
Hmm.
I don't know what that's about.
Yeah.
What's up with the sigh? So I keep wondering, like, what? You know?
Yeah, I
That's
kind of suspect with the sigh, I think we're actually offloading more CO2,
that's what it is.
the sigh. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Because yeah, that's definitely, and it does feel like an exchange of gases or whatever, something, it's just like something's changing.
mhm. Yeah. So consider the physiologic sigh for a moment, right? This is the
Hmm.
one where we take like a double inhale and then just a long
Yeah.
exhale, right? So
Yeah.
one thing that that's doing for us, like, why would we need two inhales? Well, the first inhale that we take gets us most of the way there, and oftentimes we would kind of assume like, all right, I'm full. So one, it's like, yeah, there's a bit more space there, but there's when we zoom in on the lungs, right, the alveoli are these little like
Hmm.
air-filled sacs, right? But oftentimes throughout the day, they actually like they collapse and they're kind of sitting like this here. So on that second inhale, those all kind of like pop back open. And they have this like, they're either going to be this or they're going to be this. And so once they've
Hmm.
kind of reached that state, they just tend to be there a little bit longer unless the pressure, over time allows it to kind of go back into that deflated state. So when we take that double inhale, they pop back open. That might be several thousands, tens of thousands of alveoli that pop back open. Now it's easier for us to breathe and increase that exchange. The second thing that happens is we tend to get more, like the upper lungs versus the lower lungs kind of get prioritized depending on how we breathe, right? So if we're kind of breathing through the mouth really rapidly, it tends to be more of like the upper lungs and like they're kind of just like getting most of that exchange. Because remember that the diaphragm is a slow moving muscle. It's relatively slow. And so if we just give it a little bit more time to do its thing, then we get air flowing to the lower part of the lungs, which is just larger. Um, and it's more tied in with like the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, right? So that's more of our rest and digest.
Yeah.
And so, because then when you go into your breath hold, right, you're already a little bit parasympathetic, right? Because imagine imagine you're breathing this way, but you do it in a really relaxed state, right?
Yeah.
That's how the experienced person would breathe, right? It's like, oh yeah, I got this rhythm. I'm moving my body in this way. I'm still kind of like, I'm not overdoing it. I'm not more tense than I need to be.
Yeah.
Whereas someone else, like first time, they're like, how do they breathe? Right? And they're like, they're going to be more tense, and that's more excitatory, right? So they're
Yeah.
way more sympathetic drive, which is fine. But if we're going to then transition to trying to relax as much as we possibly can,
Hmm.
right? You kind of see how like it's just less far to go for the nervous system. Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
I got it.
But yeah, I would honestly just like keep playing with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. See if you can kind of create the opposite effect with those two breathing techniques. You know what I mean? So see if you can still recreate it with your mouth breathing.
Yeah. With the
Yeah.
like that one,
Yeah.
like a straw kind of versus the with the sigh.
Yeah. Just, yeah, again, kind of the aperture, right? Just like know that you
Yeah.
can you could create a little bit of resistance if you wanted to. That might be happening where like you're working extra hard because you are pulling through the resistance.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of keep my mouth open. I mean, I fill up my bottom lungs. I fill it all the way up when I'm doing them, you know?
Mhm.
But I just wonder, like, every time I do the sighs, it's like when I get to that, the hold and the squeeze, it's like it feels like something is moving in my body,
Mhm.
versus when I'm just doing it like, you know,
Yeah.
and it almost feels like I'm forcing more air out when I do it like this versus when I go, you know, but I
Yeah.
don't know, dude. Maybe I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like we're forcing more because we're asking our um expiration muscles to work more. And so you get to feel those muscles
Hmm.
work. I think that's
Yeah.
what it is.
Um, yeah, got it. Experiment with it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, man. Well, yeah, any other questions about that?
No, I don't think so. It's just good reminders to remember to slow down the breathing in the day, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. All right. Very
Yeah.
good. Well, I'll stop the recording there and I'll see you again soon.